Shalom, and thank you for joining this episode of Voices from Our Community, where today I'm here with Patrick McGuire of Beit Yeshua Torah Assembly. And today's a little special because Patrick was actually my teacher for my first several years in this walk and was instrumental in my growth phase. So Patrick, it's nice to sit down again.
Yeah.
I know I've been out of the state for a few years, finally coming back. We should get together more often.
We need to do that. We need to do that.
Well, let's start right off the bat. I want to talk a little bit about prophecy because we did a prophecy series, actually your study, but I filmed it about 10 years ago called Overcoming the Paradigms of Prophecy. And to this date, it's the best take on prophecy I've seen. And the reason I say that is because I think your methodology is spot on. And in many ways, the methodology is every bit as important as any one conclusion because the rest of the dominoes sort of fall into place once you have that down. It seems that the most common approach today to interpreting symbols, the most common method, is almost to stick your head out of the ground, look at the world around you, find current events or whatever going on in your own culture, and shove them into this prophetic view. You obviously take a different approach. Where do you turn to find the meaning of symbols?
Well, the thing to realize, first of all, is that prophecy is virtually all symbolic. We can't take part of prophecy and say, well, this is symbolic. We're not going to see a real beast rise up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, but these other parts are literal. Okay, you can't do that. You can't pick and choose that. Either say it's literal or it's symbolic. And with it being symbolic, I found the answers to the symbols not in current events or the newspaper or television. All the answers to these symbols are found in other parts of Scripture. The other 65 books in Scripture will give us the answers to every one of these symbols. For instance, we're told in Revelation 12, there's a woman that's clothed with 12 stars and the sun and the moon. Well, how do we determine exactly who that is? We can look in Genesis and see that Joseph had a dream to where he was a star and 11 stars, the sun and the moon bowed down to him. And Jacob, his father, knew what that meant. And he's saying that me and all my children are going to bow down to you. Also, we're told that Abraham, his descendants, would be like the stars of the sky. Okay? So when you see sun, moon, and stars, start thinking Israel. Don't think catastrophic astronomical events. All right? When it says that the sun won't give its light, the moon will be red, and the stars will fall from the sky, think Israel's in trouble. So these books, they're all the same in source. So use them to determine what the symbols mean. And sure enough, that was the key to finding out the answers to the symbols, because they're all located in other parts of Scripture. And in those places where they're located, it tells you what they mean. Take that meaning, plug it into the symbols, and it tells a completely different story than one might imagine.
Right. Well, I think because it's so common, too, to use the immediate world around us to interpret these symbols, what ends up happening is we end up with this prophetic view that is very generation-centric, it's very ethnocentric, it's very nationalistic, which is probably why every president since Ronald Reagan has been the Antichrist. Prophetic books then begin to eventually take on this 2017 worldview, when really prophecy has been occurring for over 2,000 years and will continue. How do you view prophecy in terms of an overall timeline?
Okay, an overall timeline for prophecy. It starts from the time it's given. It could start from the time it's given and go for an extended period of time. Revelation, for instance, it come to find out, it says that these things will soon come to pass. In studying prophecy in this manner, in deciphering the symbols using the rest of Scripture, you find out that it started shortly after the time of John, and it's going on right now. And people are looking for all these things to be like packed into the end times. There's going to be a 7-year great tribulation, or a 7-year tribulation, a 3.5-year great tribulation, and that's nonsense. Okay, if Christianity doesn't get the Torah right, the very foundation of all Scripture, why do we use their mindset to determine what prophecy is? Looking for an antichrist, some guy like that. You had mentioned that every president since Reagan's been the Antichrist, and if you add up the letters of their names and whatever, it's 666, and oh, my aching back. But that's what we try and do. Revelation, though, has a time frame that, like I said, it started shortly after the time of John, and what it's about is the land of Israel. If you look at it starts out prophetically talking about this book with 7 seals. That's a title deed to the land of Israel. Now we know that because looking in the book of Jeremiah and also looking at land redemption that's in Scripture, Jeremiah, for instance, he bought land and before they went in captivity into Babylon, and he buried the title deed. And it's very similar to what's described in Revelation. And if we look at the laws of land redemption, it has to be done by what's called a kinsman redeemer. Now, the only person who could remember that John was crying because no one could open break the seals of the book because no one was worthy. We got to get a kinsman redeemer who both redeemed the land themselves, which Messiah did, and is a kinsman. He's a kinsman, being a son of Abraham, being a son of David. And he's the one who's worthy because with his blood, he purchased the redemption of the land and of the people. So in this title deed, what we have, this is the book of life. Now, what is the inheritance from Abraham that we're going to have? It's that land. That land is the kingdom of heaven. It's the kingdom that comes from the heavens. Okay? And that's what we're going to inherit. Our names are in that book of life if we're chosen to be his, and he's going to redeem the land and the people. And that's what he's doing, is opening that up. And what we find in Revelation then after that is there have been several kingdoms and nations that have owned the land of Israel or conquered it since the time of John. And what we find in Revelation is it goes through those different kingdoms that have owned that land. Like we have the Roman Empire, we have the Byzantine Empire, we have the Islamic Empire, and they're all described in there, and about their rise and their fall are all shown in that particular prophecy in all of Revelation.
So it's all about Israel, not the United States of America.
It's not about the United States. It's not about Disney World. It's not about Christianity. Christianity has a little small part in Revelation. It's called Wormwood. You did a great video on that Wormwood too.
Thank you.
And they came from that study of findings that we had in that Overcoming the Paradigms of Prophecy.
How do numbers play into all this? Numbers are one of those things that are often glossed over, but were obviously put there for a reason. And you've implemented a methodology originally used by Sir Robert Anderson in his assessment of Daniel, where he converted biblical years into our modern calendar using solar years. You've taken that method and applied it to other places in Scripture and came up with all sorts of interesting conclusions and things in history. What happens when you convert into our calendar?
Okay, Sir Robert Anderson, over 100 years ago, he was Chief Inspector of Scotland Yard, and he wrote a book called The Coming Prince, and it did just like you said. He came up with a methodology to look at time frames in Scripture. I'm a civil engineer by trade. Like you, I don't teach for money. I want to help people understand Scripture. That's what I want to do. I know that's what you want to do. It's a passion that we share. I'm a civil engineer by trade, and numbers mean a lot to me. So I took the numbers and looked at these time frames. With Sir Robert Anderson's example, what he did was show that the first 69 weeks of the 70 weeks of Daniel tell us precisely the day that Messiah would be revealed to the people. And sure enough, it takes us to 32 AD and to the very day that Messiah rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. And when you find that out, he used two things in particular that were a format for understanding time frames in prophecy. Since this one is true, maybe it applies to all time frames in prophecy. Well, sure enough, it does. First of all, the thing you realize is a day is a year in prophecy. How can you just randomly say that? Well, you don't randomly say that. You let Scripture tell us that that's what to do. For instance, the spies were in the land for 40 days. To spy out the land of Israel. So for every day they spied out the land, they had to wander in the wilderness for a year. A day is a year. Also Ezekiel laid down on one side and then the other, and he was told for 390 days and then 40 days. A day is a year. For each day he did that, I'm going to punish you for a year. And there's more to that to apply with Leviticus, which I go into also, but it ends up being a long time frame. And also understand that a year is not what we think. It's not a solar year. They're not talking about a solar year. A solar year, 365.2422 days in a year, is not what they're talking about. A year, they considered a year to be 360 days. Israel did. They considered a month to be 30 days, and consistently 12 of them, and then every so often you add a 13th month. But they considered a year to be 360 days. The surrounding nations around Israel thought that same way at that time. So if you convert a 360-day year into a solar year and understand that a day is a year, you come up with some amazing, amazing results on these time frames in Scripture and prophecy.
Right. Well, I want to talk about parables and shift for a moment, because parables are another one of those things. They're very similar to prophecy, and in some cases people will treat them symbolically, in other cases literally, and we then end up with this theology where a man building his house upon the sand is really symbolic of something else. Yet if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can literally assume the powers or the qualities of a deity. Whereas my view has always been, Elohim probably put that mountain exactly where he wants it.
Right.
So how are parables similar to prophecy when it comes to the use of symbols?
Well, in my mind, prophecy is a parable. Okay, if and using the part is the levels of interpreting Scripture, parables in prophecy are really a drash. They're not a peshat. They're not literal. Okay, now it doesn't mean they don't have literal and strong meaning. I'm not, when I say prophecy is symbolic, people right away think that, oh, you're saying it's meaningless. No, it has very powerful meaning and a very, very literal meaning. But with a parable or with prophecy, the meaning is not the account itself. If the account itself is what is important with, say, a parable, then why aren't we going out throwing seeds out on rocky ground? And because isn't that what it says? The faith, the size of a mustard seed. He says if you have the faith, which is so just even a little bit, and it's faithfulness. Every time in Scripture, think faithfulness instead of faith. If you have the faithfulness the size of a mustard seed, you can tell that mountain to be cast into the sea, and it would. Okay, well, I've looked at a lot of mountains, and of course I don't care if it jumps up and goes into the sea or not, but that'd be kind of cool. But we've not seen that happen. However, what we have seen happen is, for instance, if you look at what mountains mean in Scripture, go to Jeremiah 52. It describes Babylon as a destroying mountain. So now think kingdoms, empires, nations. That's what is the meaning of mountains and hills in Scripture. So if you say with enough faithfulness you can cast a kingdom into the sea, that's exactly what happened with Egypt. And actually that wording is used even in Exodus and in the Psalms, that Egypt was cast into the sea. And that's what Yeshua is telling us. It says when he returns, all the mountains will fall, the hills will flatten themselves, and the islands will go away. Well, it's talking about nations and kingdoms. They're going to be, man's nations and kingdoms are not going to stand when Messiah returns.
I agree. Well, Patrick, I know you're doing some weekly studies and you're broadcasting now. What else do you have going on? How can people tune in?
Okay, on our website, betyeshua.com, we broadcast live Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time and Friday nights at 7 p.m., where we do 2 sessions. And what we do is we study a chapter in Scripture each night. And then Friday night we do 2 chapters. The first one on Friday, we always try and cover a chapter in Torah. We've gone through Genesis through Deuteronomy several times on Friday nights now due to that over the last 20 years or so. But then we pick another book of Scripture, and we cover a chapter or 2 on it each night. It takes about 30 minutes to an hour. And we cover entire books of the Bible that way. People want to do different studies on a subject, for instance, like angels or maybe on demons. I don't do that. I'm not smart enough. What I have to do is just cover Scripture a bit at a time, cover it verse by verse, and then relate all these verses to the rest of Scripture. And that's really how I kind of fell into the prophecy answer, was because I tried to always relate Scripture to itself and get a better understanding. So, and that's what we do. That's really all we do, is just study Scripture. We don't have even singing or dancing, nothing wrong with those things, but we want to spend our time together studying Scripture, and that's what we do.
Final question, what would you say is the biggest issue in the Torah observant community today?
Oh boy, the biggest issue in the Torah observant community today is leadership in the Torah observant community. And I don't mean, well, there's a lack of leadership, okay, a total lack of it. There's no governing authority at all, nothing at all. There's no There's no pope of Torah obedience. And there won't be any authority until Messiah returns. And then we'll get the ultimate authority. We'll get all the answers. But in the meantime, we have so many people that want to teach and lead. Everyone wants to teach and lead. And I understand that. I understand it completely. The desire, and when you come to an understanding that Torah is the answer, it's a foundation of all of Scripture, it's a foundation of all our beliefs. I understand the feeling of that when the Spirit or the breath of the Father comes in you, and you start seeing it entirely differently, and truth starts popping out before your eyes. It's wonderful, and you want everyone else to know it. You want them to have the same experience. You want to go out and tell everybody, which is fine. Go out and tell everybody. But you'll quit doing it after a while because you'll find out they don't want to hear it. Right. Okay? And personally, I don't evangelize per se. I think the Father chooses whom He will, and if someone asks me, I'll answer. But I won't go around trying to evangelize people. I think it's a waste of time and it annoys people. Right. Okay? So the Father will choose whom He will. And with everyone wanting to be leaders, people say, well, I don't learn from any man. I call no man rabbi. And I guess you don't call any man father either. It says that too. It's not talking about a name-calling thing, okay? It's talking about, yes, the real teacher is the Spirit of the Father. Absolutely. Only the breath of the Father can shine the light of truth in our lives. However, He will use His people to point out and teach that truth to you. Right. And that's what people don't want to, let's say, give into. I know on Facebook, how many hundreds of Facebook preachers do we have out there?
Right, and some it seems like there's a good amount of scholarship and studying, and they've been at it for years. They came into this walk seeking out the wisdom of others as well.
Right.
And in many cases, it's the exact opposite. And the problem, I guess you could say, is if there's lack of scholarship, and then you have people that came to the conclusion yesterday and started putting out videos. And I could see where that's a problem, especially for so many newcomers coming into this walk. Then they have the propensity to mislead others as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what have we ended up with? If you talk to a flat earther, there's a lot out there now. There's a lot of flat earth people. There's lunar Sabbath. There's there's a ton of misinformation out there. The arguments over the calendar. Oh my goodness, it's very confusing. We have to use the best information that we have. Like I said, when we started doing this, it was just me and a few other couples, and we discussed truth, okay? We'd see in Scripture and try to make sense of it and discuss it before I would teach it.
Right.
Okay. Then after our consensus happened, no one could actually shoot holes in what I was saying or what I was thinking, or they come up with something and it made sense and I would teach it. It was then that it would get taught. Even at that, we have an open forum, okay? So people can, shoot holes in what I'm teaching if it's not right. If it's not right, I want to know it.
So you still test these ideas
Yes.
off of others before you go out and teach it yourself.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
And that makes perfect sense.
Over 20 years, it's been pretty time tested. And we've covered all of Scripture at least once. So in our verse-by-verse manner, a chapter, say 3 chapters a week, you can cover a lot of territory in 20 years. And we did.
Right, yeah. Well, Patrick, it's nice getting together again.
Yeah,
and, so
enjoyed it.
Now that I'm here in Arkansas, we should do this more often.
Let's do that.
Absolutely. I like to thank you guys as well for joining us for this episode of Voices from Our Community with Patrick McGuire.